Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. So you may be seated for a moment. Seated for a moment. So as you know, Mark Stanger and I brought 35 pilgrims to the Holy Land last September, and you just saw 3 of them, who are going to share their story. And part of the thing about taking pilgrimage is learning the difference between being a tourist and going on pilgrimage. Being a tourist and pilgrim are the same exterior things. You pack your bags, you make sure you have money, you have your maps, you have your passport. But the difference in being a pilgrim is as you prepare, you are praying and you're reading the scriptures. And when we ended up in the Holy Land, every place we stopped, we read the scriptures. We heard more about the place that we were. We had an opportunity to pray and to linger there. Pilgrims have been going on pilgrimage to the Holy Land forever. But during the 12th and 13th century, during the Crusades, they weren't able to go. It wasn't safe to go. So they started building the cathedrals in Europe and in England, so that you could do that in lieu of going to the Holy Land. And that's part of the reason the cathedrals are so grand, that when you've walked from wherever you've walked from to get to this cathedral, and you go up the steps and your eyes go up the spire towards heaven, and you step inside, and the stories of Jesus' life are in stained glass, and you look up to the altar and the rose window, and the glory of God surrounds you. The pilgrims today are going to tell you stories of where the glory of Jesus touched their hearts. Mike. And there will be slides up here, and I must confess, I used to make fun of and get irritated with AV guys in high school that couldn't get it to work. What goes around comes around. Please be patient.
Thank you, Reverend Lynn. The pilgrimage to the Holy Land had for a long time been my #1 bucket list trip, especially after hearing about it from earlier pilgrims such as Reverend Sylvia, Walt and Sue Basinius, Nancy and Earl Turner, and Mary Waddington. The actual experience far exceeded my expectations. First, to travel with such a wonderful group of people, most of them faithful Episcopalians, and to have such learned and caring leaders. Mark Stanger from Grace Cathedral, our own Reverend Lynn Sharp, our superb guide, Iyad Kumri, who is a Palestinian Christian, and our bus driver, whom we all called Omar the Magnificent. We stayed in superb accommodations in Israel and Nazareth. We got to experience firsthand the places where Jesus' coming was announced, where he was born, where he grew up, where he fasted and was tempted in the wilderness, where he taught and preached, where he prophesied and performed miracles, where he healed, where he fed people, where he slept, where he was arrested, was put on trial and suffered, where he died and was resurrected, where he appeared again to his disciples. All of these places we visited. One of the many highlights for me were the day we got up before daybreak and drove to a spot overlooking the Wadi Kelt to witness a magnificent sunrise. At this spot, we celebrated Eucharist. Our backdrop was the road Jesus took from Jericho to Jerusalem after he had spent 40 days in the wilderness and was tested by the devil. Also, this is where the story of the Good Samaritan occurred. And in the background, we were joined by a Bedouin family hoping to sell us remembrances of our visit. Before, during, and after the Eucharist, the very young children were playing and having a grand old time. We were able to visit with them and their father. They lived in a tiny village not far from where we were. And afterward, a fellow villager offered camel rides to some of our more brave pilgrims. Another highlight for me was our visit to Zacchaeus' sycamore tree in Jericho. Remember Zacchaeus, the little tax collector, who climbed up the tree to get a better look at Jesus? This very tree is reputed to be either the same tree or it sprang from the roots of the same tree. And Jericho is the oldest city in the world. One night, one more highlight was Deborah Webster to demonstrate the great acoustics, singing the Ave Maria from the stage of an ancient Roman amphitheater. So many unforgettable and spiritually uplifting moments. The trip really brought Jesus' ministry and the Bible to life for me. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Deborah Webster. And throughout our pilgrimage, we visited countless holy sites, as we've mentioned. In fact, we'd been walking on holy ground since the day we had arrived. I was getting pretty used to this constant sensation of being in awe, just awestruck as we followed the footpaths of Jesus' life. I want to share our 7th day of the pilgrimage as we head for Capernaum and the Sea of Galilee. Just when I didn't think I could be any more giddy, I found myself still rising to a new level of awe. We stop at the mouth of the Jordan River, and Reverend Lynn leads us through a renewal of our baptismal vows. Sorry. Didn't expect this. And we're sprinkled with the water from the river, the Jordan River. From the Jordan River with the Sea of Galilee right there behind us where we're standing. Then we drive on to Capernaum, and while standing over the excavated ruins of Peter's home, I was overcome again with awe, just yet again. Here in Capernaum, I literally stepped into Jesus' physical world. Jesus lived here. He taught here. He broke bread here. I could suddenly imagine Jesus, Peter, other disciples just walking around the paths, going about their daily lives. The rocks and the sand from the ruins were nearly vibrating with sound and images, trying to tell their story about this village. I listened with intensity. The entire trip. We followed the coastline for another mile or two to the Church of the Primacy of St. Peter. This is right on the shoreline of the Sea of Galilee. Here we could access the sea from the beach inlet. Phil and I and many of the other pilgrims, we all quickly tore off our shoes and waded in. And then standing in the water, turning back towards the church on the shore there, we can see an outcrop of rock onto which the church was built, right on top. The rock then was allowed to breach the floor surface inside the church, and now you can see that the church was actually built to protect or house this rock. This holy ground, this place where Jesus stood on the rocks at the shore of Galilee and called out to the disciples in their fishing boat to throw the net on the other side. I touched that rock in this holy place. If that wasn't exciting enough, we went to see the first century fishing boat that was recently discovered and preserved. This could actually be a boat that belonged to the disciples. Could Jesus have sailed in this very boat? Very possibly. We then went on a boat ride in a newer wooden boat on the Sea of Galilee. Being out on the water, looking back to the shoreline, I could almost see Jesus watching us, ready to give us instructions. As I looked for him, I felt this overwhelming sense of gratitude come over me. At first, it was a feeling of just being grateful for being able to join this pilgrimage and have such an awesome experience. But then a new feeling of gratitude took over, this huge, glowing sense of Jesus being here in this physical presence of this place. Jesus is here with us on this earth. I've brought the sense of this awe home, and every day I'll remember this and try my best to walk his path. He's here.
I first signed up for this trip to see the Holy Land like a tourist, fascinated in things that were new and historical and curious to me. But it soon became something else. Reverend Lynn had said, when you go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, you have to carry all of your congregation's prayers with you and ask God to support them. So it became something else. It became a pilgrimage. I told my non-church friends I had always wanted to see the Holy Land. It was in my bucket list. They understood. But in preparation and study, as I learned more, I became a pilgrim. I had heard that for many, a trip to the Holy Land changed them, and not always in ways that were religious. We went to many sites mentioned in the Bible where miracles are performed, where Jesus preached, where things happened. To me, being a trained geographer, I always look at the details, the physical and cultural things to explain my milieu and where I'm at. I would look at the geology and ask myself what minerals would come from this land. I'd look at the flat land and wonder about how it could be farmed. I looked at the terrain. I looked at the water resources. This is what I would normally do when I travel. I soon realized these things, these details, were only ancillary to what was really important to me. I can easily get lost in these details and avert from my spiritual aspirations. During the pilgrimage, we went to many of the places in the Old and New Testament, and my favorite were in the Old Quarter, the original Jerusalem, where Jesus would have traveled as an ordinary man. Here is a picture of a mural of how it might have looked back in those days. This area was just being full of life. The small alley-like streets were packed with people, and I loved it. When I travel, I always try to go to farmers markets and see what's available to locals and what's important to them. I walked them in the late afternoons or evenings when I had free time. The things that were for sale were exotic and exciting. These tight, narrow corridors where vendors had been selling things for many generations. I love the spices and the food and the color, and to me it was very exciting. You know, all the different kinds of olives and and all of these technical things of the culture were transforming to me. But two images stand out now, especially now that I'm home. While visiting the church that surrounds the place where Jesus was said to have been crucified, Golgotha, I came down and I touched the large flat stone where Jesus' body may have been prepared before being taken to the tomb. Touching it was shocking, electrifying. In a flash, I saw my Lord's life flash in front of me, from his birth to his crucifixion. I was surprised. I fell to my knees and I prostrated myself. It's hard to describe. When I looked up, I pulled myself together, nearly embarrassed, and walked out of the church. I waited for the rest of our group to come out. I stood contemplating what I had seen, and as I did, I looked over and saw what seemed like a homeless person. He was the kind of person that if I had seen on Market Street or in Walnut Creek downtown, I'd avoid. He had bundles. He had a large walking stick, maybe not sure where he'd spend the night. One might be afraid to look at him in the eye because he might start talking to you in a loud voice. He might ask for money or a place to stay. He was standing there reading the Bible. But in a way, he looked to me like Jesus. He's in this white alb, and he had long hair, and that's just how he looked. And when I tried to ignore him, maybe the way others would ignore Jesus when he was awake, alive, a crazy person who had a spiel that could upset one's life. I now wished I'd gone up to him and tried to introduce myself, and then asked him, "What are you reading?" But I didn't. I left him alone. I ignored him. I denied him. But I felt Jesus' love.
Really moving stories, really transformative stories of how we are changed when we encounter Jesus. One of the ancient maps that I love, now we'll see if I can do technology and talk. I don't think so. It's like walking and chewing gum. Europe is off to the left, Asia to the right, Africa to the south, and in the very heart is Jerusalem. The heart of civilization, the birthplace of civilization. And that's where we were. We walked, as the other pilgrims said, this is Shepherd's Field outside Bethlehem, where you can still see shepherds leading their sheep. We went into a cave there, one that a family might have stayed in with their animals, so from the very beginning of Jesus' life. And then we continued on. On the top of this mount is where the Beatitudes that we heard today were read. Jesus telling us that we are blessed, we are blessed, we are blessed, we are blessed. You see the cave partway down, right across the street nowadays, it was a path in the old days, of course, is the Sea of Galilee. And so as people gathered at the base of the mountain or out in their small boats as families, if you stand at the mouth of the cave, it acts like amplification. You can hear clear as a bell across the street. This was an archaeological dig. These are first century stairs. These are the stairs that Jesus would have walked going from the upper room down to the Garden of Gethsemane, or then back up to the Garden of Gethsemane, and then led back through the Kidron Valley up these very stairs to the house of Caiaphas, where he was imprisoned overnight before his trial. Every step of the way, hearing the scriptures, being present with other people who were praying, it transforms. But what I'm here to tell you is you don't have to go to the Holy Land to have this experience. Every week we gather as community. Every week we hear the scriptures. Every week we pray together. We share in the communion. And that is another way of being transformed by Jesus' love. I invite you, as we're preparing to go into Lent, to think about the ways that you can strengthen your faith, go deeper into your relationship with Jesus through reading the scriptures, through talking with other Christians, through prayer and meditation, and through almsgiving. Amen.